I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas-Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome everyone to our episode for converting to Pathfinder Second Edition. Since Pathfinder Second Edition is pretty new, and there's a whole lot of content for Pathfinder First Edition, I won't be surprised if huge numbers of people right now are converting to Pathfinder Second Edition. In fact, I am too. My War for the Crown game is getting towards the end of Book 5 of 6, and it's been converted to Pathfinder Second Edition, or the playtest, or the proto game that existed in between the playtest and Pathfinder Second Edition, basically for its entire run that Linda is playing in. So I've had a lot of experience. I converted Book 1 of Rise of the Runelords to run for the rest of the designers. I converted Shattered Star, which is on Book 4, to run with developers and editors, although that sort of stalled out when the playtest was winding down. Should start it up again.
Yeah, I would love to play that again.
And
we played in Second Edition full on.
Yeah, we would do it in Second Edition full on, I think.
Yeah.
It really had a huge rotating cast of people because, 16 people were part of the list of who was interested in playing, because, every developer and editor was invited if they weren't in somebody else's playtest game. And 16 said, yeah, sure, send me the email. But we still had trouble getting 4 people for any given week. So you can imagine that you often had someone different, and that...
after work gaming at Paizo. Actually getting people to have time to play games.
That is which person showed up. And not to mention that, for instance, John Compton had a different character pretty much every time, so he tested a whole swath of different classes and got us a lot of really good data early on. Oh, wow, thanks for sending out subs to everybody, Author US Dale, or Authorus Dale. Is it US, or is it us? Maybe
How
it's
should we
Authorus
pronounce your
Dale.
username?
There we go.
We have another
that's so
Santa,
generous.
Yay!
Let me give you the extra
Authoress
XP.
Dale?
Authoress Dale. Got it. Well, there you have it. I'm gonna give...
And thanks for the subscription, A-Fox.
Yeah. So A-Fox already gets the automatic amount for subscribing, as do all the people who are gifted get XP for them. I'm gonna give Author's Dale bonus experience for... Oh wait, no, that's not the right amount.
Yes,
there we go. That's the right amount. I can do math today, I promise. What a great community. We honestly have so many engaged and subscribed and such community members that it's beyond the level that even for a Twitch partner they would be like, oh wow, you get extra emojis compared to the baseline Twitch partner. We just don't have as many concurrent viewers, so that's what we're working on. Oh wow, thanks for subscribing, Max Astro. Hey, I know Max Astro from the message boards. Assuming it's the same Max Astro. Alright. So...
And yes, Malachi, this is the episode about converting to Second Edition, and I'm not going to mispronounce your username again.
That's right. It's Malachi. It's, very biblical.
Mm-hmm.
Alright.
Alright, so... Given that this is about converting to Second Edition, I imagine that Mark's going to be doing more of the presentation of information.
I will, but, keep in mind that even though it might be tempting to think that the fact that I had converted Linda's Adventure of Reaping What We Sow to the playtest the year before, that she might have used that. She converted Reaping What We Sow to Second Edition entirely on her own without using any of my materials.
Yeah, well, you converted it to the playtest,
yes,
so I just wanted to convert it to Second Edition.
But the point is that you also have converted at least one adventure to Second Edition.
That's true.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you easily could convert more based on your conversion of Reaping What We Sow. So I feel like you have tips for converting adventures as well. And also, since you've created more PCs than I have, you might have ideas for sort of converting the ideas of PCs. Obviously, they weren't all XPs of your character Illyria from Curse of the Crimson Throne. But there was a cleric version of Illyria, a barbarian version of Illyria, and a fighter version of Illyria. So Plus, Illyria is the barbarian with the alchemist archetype from the art in the core rulebook. So, everything's coming up Illyria.
All right.
Oh, hi, Spartans.
So certainly we have, with conversion, you have different types of conversion. So there's conversion of monsters, there's conversion of NPCs, there's conversions of PCs, and there's conversion of adventure elements. So which one would you like to talk about today first?
Alright, and first, Malachi Constant is hoping that we will talk about not just converting from PF1, but also converting from classic D&D or other editions or adventures. So, I think we could pronounce authoress. It's just that I saw the U.S. and I pulled it out. And because author was a word, it's just how you parse in the middle of words, I suppose. Arcane gives a tip of the earlier the adventure is, the more likely that you have all the monsters you need if they're all from the bestiary.
Maytrace has asked for game elements first, like traps and things. So I suppose when it comes to traps and hazards and things like that, Second Edition puts all of these dangers, for be they traps, be they haunts, be they other hazards, together into one hazards category. And they're all generally going to be using the same set of rules for what's appropriate for their attack bonuses for their level, for their save DC for their level, even things like how much damage do they deal if it's a single target versus an area. And there's going to be a lot more guidance on that matter, more specifically in the Game Mastery Guide. But for what you have right now, certainly the examples that are in the core rulebook can be super helpful for patterns to look off for those. And when converting hazards, generally, I suppose the first thing to think about is whether you want it to be a simple hazard, which is something that just is sort of fire and forget. This is a thing that it does, boom, it makes an attack roll, boom, it does a spell, and you're going to be making a reflex save or things like that. Versus a complex hazard, which is that ongoing thing that continues to affect you round after round after round. So if you had something that was a persistent haunt, for example, in First Edition, or an analogous thing where you have something that continues to affect you round after round, that's going to be a complex hazard. So complex hazards versus simple hazards, generally the simple hazards are going to be a lot more damaging and in your face, boom, this is a powerful thing that happens, because it's something that's just fire and forget, that affects you, and then you move on. Whereas the complex hazard is really, it's more akin to a creature in that it's something that is there in the encounter, it has an initiative, and it's going to continue to act. So I would say deciding which of those two types of hazards you want is going to be your first step when it comes to converting a hazard to Second Edition. Another thing is, really, and this applies for monsters as well, to look at what is the core of the concept. So, for example, if you were looking at a trap that caused someone to fall into a spiked pit trap, say. You fall into a pit and it has spikes in it.
I would say that the pit and the spikes are the core of the concept.
The pit and the spikes are the core of the concept. The core of the concept is not necessarily that the exact amount of damage that it deals, or the exact conditions that something might inflict. So if it's a poison spike pit trap, it's not so important that, oh, well, previously this did constitution damage poison. It's not so important that it does exactly that, but you're getting the thematic ideas across. And then for a monster, for example, it's not so important that the monster would have the exact same list of SLAs that it had in First Edition.
In fact,
the exact same list of immunities.
In fact, it's probably pretty important that it doesn't have those things, because those usually got in the way of monsters when it just has so many spells that are not helpful for the monster to know. That's definitely true. That's true not just with converting, but just with building your own monster. So, to some extent, knowing about converting is also knowing about building things. People in the chat, as you've been talking about hazards, pointed out all the different things they thought were the hardest things to convert. For instance, some people said that monsters and NPCs are the hardest things to convert. But the unfortunate pumpkin said that those are pretty easy to convert, but magic items are the hardest thing to convert. And so, really, fundamentally, there's not really much that is hard to convert as long as you're willing to look at it, just like Linda said about the hazards, as what is the fundamental core of the thing. I mean, I suppose the only things that are hard to convert are things that are hard to build in 2nd edition at all. Like, if you were converting a class and you were pretty dogmatic that it had to be a class, then you have to design a new class. And that is challenging because you have to design a new class, right? But converting a monster is not really too bad once you have the rules to create a monster. Converting a monster into NPC. It won't take too long. You guys just don't have those rules yet. And Jason has said that we are planning on trying to get to those to you expeditedly as a preview, basically when they're ready to be seen by external folks. Before the Game Mastery Guide is out. He said it a few times at this point. I think I'm okay with repeating it here pretty much, that he's on the hook for that now after promising it, that we're going to try. And that will be very helpful in converting. Honestly, one of the big barriers for any one of you guys to converting is the lack of that information. Once you have it, I think you'll find that converting monsters and NPCs is actually very easy to do. It's probably easier, or no, it's definitely easier than actually running Pathfinder First Edition if your group is like a different size or optimization level and you had to customize the encounters, just because it's compatibly similar thematically enough and easy enough to make the monster that it's easy. The difference in translating from one to the other surpasses just the general difficulty of making a Pathfinder First Edition monster. To the point that it's easier to just convert it flat out to PF2 than to adjust it in PF1 to fit a group with a very different dynamic.
So, Arcade's talking here about converting third-party and obscure first-party options. There's so many options that people have drawn from. It's a huge amount of content to convert.
Yeah, purely if you go from, I guess, a volume perspective, then even if each thing is in, like, if you have an adventure that has 100 monsters that aren't in the bestiary, even if each individual monster only takes you 5 minutes to convert, less, if you can convert it on the fly almost, it takes a minute or two, that's still hours of your time converting them all. And also, why did it have 100 monsters that were not in the bestiary? Like, even, that's a lot of different kinds of monsters. But, Arcane is right, that honestly, just the number of things is usually what's really going to trip you up. And to go back to Unfortunate Pumpkin's thought about magic items, I would say the best way to do that is often, unless it's like, oh wow, this is a unique, interesting item that would show up as an uncommon, rare, or unique option that people should remember about this adventure, that instead of converting the magic item, convert the treasure. That may sound like the same thing, but by that I mean, if the monsters dropped Belt of Giant Strength +2, Cloak of Resistance +1, Cloak of Resistance +1, Cloak of Resistance +1, Cloak of Resistance +1, Ring of Protection +1, Ring of Protection +1, Longsword +1, Longsword +1, Rapier +1.
True facts about First Edition NPC drops.
97 suits of +1 studded leather armor from the Council of Thieves that we just had to sell in bulk to someone who wanted that instead of just a chain shirt that had the same AC.
Yeah, but I mean, some of these items too, like, you wouldn't want to directly convert anyway, because either a version of that already exists, in which case you're like saying, okay, yeah, you have a +1, you have a +1 armor that has whichever runes on it, or, you know, just flat out items that give bonuses aren't as much of a thing in 2nd edition, and when they are, you'll generally already see that presented in the core rulebook. So, or it's something that gives a bonus that's of an appropriate level and then it has some extra thing that it does.
So when I see something that I'm just looking in more for the crown, and I'm like, nah, I'll usually just look on the list of items that are about the level of my party and just throw one of those in instead. Assuming I saw that the thing was clearly an actually substantial item. Like, Linda's group has gotten runes and other things that obviously were not in the initial War for the Crown Treasure, where I didn't necessarily like spend hours doing this. It was more just like the first time I came across that piece of treasure, I replaced it with either by writing a note for myself or even like on the fly as I was running it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I don't have that treasure to give out, nor would I want to convert it. How about a shadow rune for armor?
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of can work for treasure, and it actually makes it a little bit easier. Even though you guys don't have the rules from Game Mastery Guide for creating magic items, which will be a refrain, I guess, continually of the core rulebook was a giant monster of a book, and honestly, it would probably just like collapse into a black hole if it also had all of the Game Mastery Guide stuff. And I honestly, we say a lot that we made the decisions of where to put creation rules and everything like that based on your guys' analysis in the survey that you wanted them not in the bestiary so that you could have more monsters. But honestly, I think you guys made the right choice, and we like that decision anyway because it sort of makes it so core rulebook is all that you need to play and run the game. And the bestiary has all the monsters you need, but the Game Master Guide is for tinkering. It's for tinkering, adjusting, going beyond the bare minimum of what you need that's in the core rulebook. And so I think that that's just the right place to have creation of different rules elements. It's not the best that it's taken us a while to get it out, but it's just that's the reality of how long it took to do the launch.
Well, I think there's another thing too for converting monsters, for example. Even if you don't have those guidelines for the GMG yet, you can certainly take monsters that exist in the bestiary and tweak them a little bit, using that as the chassis of the monster, and then switching out some of its abilities. Because then you know, okay, the fundamental core of this monster, its resistances versus its weaknesses versus its hit points versus AC, all those, and how high its bonuses are. That core is balanced, but like, let's say that you trade out one resistance for another resistance, and you trade out one of its special abilities for something roughly comparable in power, and you change what it looks like completely. Suddenly, you know, it's a different monster, and you can present it to PCs that way if you find something that is kind of similar to what you're going for. And so you don't have to completely reinvent.
And zombies and skeletons, some of them have a mix and match style already, and we highly suggest, even if you're not needing to convert, it's just a good idea to every once in a while, like, take out one of the little abilities on a monster and just throw something in. Maybe your owlbear was never the loudest of the bunch. It doesn't hoot all the time, but has some other ability instead of hooting. And that also keeps players on their toes, so they're not just thinking, oh wow, literally every troll in the world is exactly this troll.
And maybe you want something that, maybe you find you need a brute monster and you find one that attacks with claws, but you really want something that attacks with a giant jaw instead. You can just say, oh, well, that's a jaw attack instead. Okay. And you replace the ability that that thing had some ability that cued off of its claws, and then you replace that with an ability that cues off of, oh, it's biting you, and now you're bleeding or whatever.
That's
so
right.
You can use that as certainly a starting point.
And Max Extra points out that just like with Treasure, where the monster asks, does it really need this ability? That's true to an extent. However, often when it comes to monsters in PF1, they might not have actually had enough defining abilities in some cases. I'm constantly using the example now because it blew my mind that the owlbear was just the same level but weaker than the dire tiger. It just didn't have pounce. It had grab. It had the same abilities. The stats were very similar. But a lot of cases, if it has spell-like abilities in Pathfinder 1, which would be innate spells in Pathfinder Second Edition, usually a lot of creatures just have way over the top of in a way that makes it hard to run them and not interesting and tied to the creature. Especially if it's sort of a heritage from, that was inherited in Pathfinder First Edition from before. But even if not. But when it comes to unique special abilities, sometimes monsters don't have those. So don't be afraid, like Linda said, to just add like one or two unique abilities to the math that you already have for a certain monster and call it good. because oftentimes that's gonna work just as well as really building and converting your own monster. For NPCs, people are pointing out that it might be a little harder, or it seems like it's harder to know how the shark says than monsters if they aren't built like PCs. I would say, first of all, you can build them like PCs. Unlike in Starfinder, it's fully supported. It'll work fine. But the assumption that they're harder than monsters since they aren't built like PCs is the wrong way to think about it, in my opinion. If they were built like PCs, holy moly, that would be way harder than anything else, because PCs take all the effort to make a 17th level PC that we expect would be taken at first level and then leveling up 16 times throughout a long process.
That's a lot of selections to make.
That's tons of selections. I think that nothing is harder than making a high-level PC.
So if you were to so when you go about making an NPC, I mean, you can see the examples that we have in the bestiary as well, that these NPCs use the same kind of math structure as monsters, and then what you can do is you can tack, just like with monsters, how monsters have special abilities, you can tack special abilities on there that are literally doing the same thing as some kind of a feat, or something very similar. So let's say that you want to make a Dwergar monk. You can start with the Dwergar baseline, and then you're like, okay, what defines a monk for this character? Flurry of Blows. Okay, it has Flurry of Blows. I'm going to say what Flurry of Blows does. And you can give it maybe a couple other monk abilities, and then boom, you have a Dwergar monk, and you didn't have to decide what all of its skill feats were,
I'm sure you
training.
didn't need any Dwergar in your dwarf adventure from Age of Ashes.
This was a purely hypothetical example,
There
clearly.
couldn't possibly be any Dwergar monks in there.
Just off the cuff, you know.
Okay. Unfortunate Pumpkin points out the weak and elite adjustments are your friends. They definitely are your friends. You can use them a lot to populate the levels that you need, especially if we change the level of a monster on you a little bit because of in-world story reasons or other reasons that we did that. You using a weak or elite could make it fit into the expected build loadout of the adventure you're converting, because we did make an XP and encounter building system that, while it's way easier to build an encounter this way than it was before, you wind up building encounters that have like roughly the same levels of monsters in them as you would have thrown against a PF1 group, which allows you to convert very easily. Like, if a PF1 group of a certain level would fight a boss encounter with 3 CR6 because it's PF1 creatures, 3 level 6 creatures is probably also a boss encounter in Pathfinder Second Edition, and that continues for almost any number of creatures at almost any level. And because of that, it makes it very easy to convert encounters.
I want to take Nohart's question here.
Okay.
How do we know how much having Flurry of Blows changes that monster's level? So, actually, when creating the monsters, you sort of think about it in the opposite direction. You say, I want this monster to be level 10 and I want it to have Flurry of Blows. And then I see how much, how does Flurry of Blows work or whatever. And then I look at the chart for how much damage this creature is supposed to do. And then I set how much damage it's supposed to do based on what I want it to do for that level.
Top down, not bottom up. So, Flurry of Blows is part of your chassis for the monster. Basically, even when you're converting, you can't necessarily do it completely top down. You might do some kind of a mix, especially if you're building it off of another monster that was already created. You're doing small adjustments. So you might say, okay, this guy's got Flurry of Blows and a few added abilities. I literally just added them on to everything I had before. I took nothing out in exchange. Obviously, I'm raising it at least a level for this. You decide how many you are going to raise it. Then you decide, basically, if the new abilities you gave kind of just make sense to be, those are the abilities it gained while it went up those levels. I'll just use its stats normally for a creature of those levels. Again, a little harder without the creation guide, but you guys pointed some good kit bash tools that you can use to try to figure that out. Or you can say, well, no, these are even more abilities than that level adjustment would imply. Maybe I won't give it quite all of the math it's supposed to have. That's a dangerous choice to make, because generally a creature can have all of the fun abilities that you want, but if it doesn't hold up to snuff, it might not get to use them. Now, granted, if your ability is super busted and it doesn't give you any chance to resist it or something like that,
then you should probably add a chance to
you
resist
might want to not make it super busted. But
Yeah.
if it's very important that it be super busted, maybe it will change the like. It could be okay for something who has a weird and obscure shtick to have that adjust their and alter their stats. But normally, you say, okay, well, I'm adding this much worth of stuff. That's probably 2 levels worth of, let's say it was 2 levels worth of abilities, and I'll raise their stats normally for 2 levels. Now, when I say raising their stats normally for 2 levels, I don't mean apply the elite adjustment twice. The elite adjustment is more, basically the elite adjustment is what kind of math could have happened at that level. Let's round it up. You gain no abilities, and hopefully that will, and you didn't gain any abilities, a creature of that level probably would have gained abilities. Hopefully rounding it up is not too extreme, but it is rounding it up.
So you don't want to double or triple elite because your numbers are going to go up.
Because then you round it up multiple times, so you have like no major abilities for a creature of those levels, but its stats are incredible. And similarly, the weak template, it's like, yeah, it may have really inappropriate abilities for a creature of its new level, but its numbers, we've rounded up the amount of numbers it would lose for going down, so it probably has pretty bad numbers. But that still means that you don't want to say, oh yeah, I took this level this wizard enemy that had 9th level spells. I give it 5 weak adjustments, so it still has 9th level spells, but it has -10 on all of its numbers, and it's a level 12 opponent. Because its numbers are going to be absolute garbage for its level at that point, but it's going to have 9th level spells.
So it's like, oh, it doesn't do anything to you unless you roll, like, a natural 1. And if you roll a natural 1, then you're completely screwed with the fact that it's so much higher level than you should be having to deal with yet.
That's right. Take Meteor Swarm, everyone, with a really low DC, but still.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That is an important thing to consider with multi-applying those templates, but if you just apply them once, the amount they distort by rounding should not affect you too much. Max Astro says basically build NPCs like monsters with PC-flavored abilities. Yes, that's one way to do it, or even with NPC-flavored abilities, right? You could have an NPC who's I don't know, Linda, name some kind of random job in the world. I don't want to name one that's like in the Game Mastery Guide.
A baker.
A baker? Yeah, you could have, like, an NPC who's a baker, and they have an ability that's based on, like, throwing stale bread at people.
Yeah.
Or they can wield bread that's stale as, like, a weapon for some reason. And, when they eat fresh bakery goods, then maybe that gives them a benefit on something or something
Max
like that.
is a good point. It's just like how you wouldn't want to continue stacking the advanced template on things in first edition because you run into the same sorts of things where the AC is just like, what even is this? I mean, when I was scaling up monsters in first edition, the way that I generally go about it is I would look at where the monster was relative to the expected metrics for its level, and then I would say, okay, what are the expected metrics for this higher level, and I would try to make it hit at the same point.
Yes.
So it would sort of
be like... That's a good idea for sure in second edition. It's just they don't have those expected numbers.
Yeah. No, I know, but what I'm saying is that it's easier in... What I'm saying is that it's easier in second edition, I think, because instead of having so much of a, like, oh, wait, this was super under, second edition gives more of a sense of, like, what's appropriate for for a creature that's got bad at this thing, what's appropriate for a creature that's moderate at this thing, what's appropriate for a creature that's good at this thing.
Which they also don't have yet.
Yes. Well, you will down the road have that, yes.
Oh, thanks for all the Mitflit love, everyone, and the new name, because I came up with that new name when I wrote the Gremlin entry, and we didn't... through the numerous people that it went through in the process, it was not changed, and the idea of their self-hate and the bane and their precision damage.
Well, that's one thing I like about that is changing with second edition is the idea that of naming groups of people based on what they actually call themselves. Like, that lizard folk aren't going around being like, yes, I'm going to call myself a lizard folk because I'm like a normal folk, but I look like a lizard. Like, no, you don't call yourself that. So, bringing into the fourth what these people actually call themselves and having those names come out.
Midfoot
cool.
just sounded like the other gremlin names to me, but also like something that could have gotten diminutized to might very easily by people, and that is what I was going for with that. It might be because they're miserable.
Well, they're kind of like...
There was actually a really fun line that actually survived development and design passes alike from my Gremlin turnover, but not the harsh mistress of copy fitting at the very end. That was talking about how, like, because of the way that they are, if there's someone who is, like, good aligned, very patient, and willing to show camaraderie with them, it is relatively straightforward for them to be able to, like, try to redeem a mite settlement compared to other gremlins who are, like, this fame manifestation of malice.
Midfoots are just kind of like...
Especially if you're a strong leader that they can look up to.
They're like the little woobies, and it's like, they're, like, always getting kicked around, and then they follow these evil leaders. But if you can actually show them that they have worth as beings, and, like, tell them to believe in themselves and show them a different way, then, you know, you can redeem them.
Yep, and as Eltro said, it does also sound like Misfit. That was one of the things I was going for on it.
What does a doppelganger call itself?
Maybe it calls itself a doppelganger, and that's just where the word doppelganger comes from, is the monster.
Yeah. Because that wasn't one of those that's like, oh, your name is Troglodyte. Okay. Oh, your name is Lizard Folk. Your name is Rat Folk.
Your name is Cat Folk.
Yeah.
Your name is Monkey Folk. But you call yourselves humans.
Yes. Exactly.
Also, squirrel.
Yup.
Alright.
Oh, I like that. I like that, FYJ it calls itself whatever it's pretending to be. Otherwise, it would be a terrible disguise.
That's a good point. Take that, doppelgangers.
I'm totally a human.
Human, sir. That's a name I can trust. Alright, let's go back to converting things, though. So we talked about converting monsters somewhat. When you're converting an adventure, you can pretty much run the adventure. You can use the DC, the sample DCs by, the simple ones by proficiency, the level one by level, but don't overuse them. Like, if it's just an easy check, then let it just be an easy check. You don't need to, when you're converting, be like, this is an adventure for 10th level characters. Everything in it will use the 10th level DCs with some adjustments, but you don't need to do that. Oh, dare he know how the shark points out, are also monkey folk, like humans.
Yeah. So...
And Vanara too. But yeah, you don't need to convert everything to 10th level DC, but you probably should convert, like, the essential challenges of the adventure itself that are like, well, this is a central plot point that we do this subsystem or something like that to be more close to the PC's levels. But other checks that are just in there for something that might happen, it needs to make sense with the story. A lot of those are going to be much lower. Well, not than first level if it's a first level adventure, obviously. But at high level adventures, there would be a bunch that is just like, yeah, climbing this ledge. That's not that hard. You can just climb this ledge. Also,
another type of check, you can just convert things directly, but there's a lot of potential in converting checks, skills, and things like that into the success, critical success, critical failure system. So, for example, if you had something that was originally a really, really high check, then maybe that's the critical success result, and you can find a little bit of information on the lower success.
Yep.
And the critical failure still gives you, as expected for second edition, something that's completely off. One thing is
that's a good point. Like, for instance, the classic first time was, for those very high numbers, right in the beginning of Rise of the Rune Lords, all of these artistic depictions of Rune Lords who, at that point, nobody really knew what they looked like, and it had been 10,000 years since anybody did, were like DC 25 checks to identify that Rune Lord. But you could say, well, this is a DC 15 check. On a DC 15, then you identify that you think this is actually one of the Thessalonian rune lords or an important wizard of Thessalon, and the 25 is like, because you could just tell just by their status at 15 to critical successes, oh, that's a Lasnest.
Yes.
I know who that is, even though that's not a famous name at this point.
And to give another example of a structure you'll see, particularly in scenarios where you have the thing where it's like information. You have that's scaled by DC, so, 10 plus. You get a 10 plus, you find this information. You get a 15 plus, you'll find this information. You get a 20 plus, you find this information. You notice for second edition, we've crunched those down into 2 bands, so you have the critical success information and the success information. That just makes things easier because those types of things where they have stair steps of DCs don't really translate as directly.
And Night Fox talks about in PFS, Night Fox's first game, failing a very simple climb up 5 feet onto a platform, which in second edition could just be, okay, a regular failure is you get up, but it takes you another action. Absolutely. Is that how you pronounce a Lasnest? That's how I pronounce a Lasnest. Nobody knows what the real pronunciation is.
Well, I mean, James Jacobs does.
Except James Jacobs. But there's some things in the office that still have a lot of very different pronunciations. Like, James pronounced it Scarney, but I know a lot of people that don't.
Yeah.
Because those consonants, and we pronounce it that way because we heard James pronounce it that way, even from fairly early on. But those consonants don't look like that's what they're saying. So I can see why.
It's interesting when you are in a line of work with so many made-up words, and every day people are making up more made-up words, trying to have a consistent sense of how you pronounce all this stuff. Fortunately, most of the time we just get to write it down.
Also, I'm pretty sure I've heard James say a Lasnest, and it was a Lasnest.
Yeah.
Unfortunate Pumpkin points out sometimes it's a word from another culture, like Ameko, or Amiko as. There's a network error. Did you guys lose us?
They can't hear us because there's a network error. Please refresh.
Respond if you can't see this.
Is the internet still okay?
You guys all could see and hear us.
Okay, well, that
was
weird.
Our Twitch just said there's a network error, even though our streaming seemed to work.
Anyway, we're back.
Sure.
And it seems to work for us.
I
can see your
We can see all of your chats, and the chat never went down, just the video of us watching ourselves on Twitch said network error.
Alright, that was odd. Anyway, we're back.
Alright. So, pronunciation is something you don't have to worry about converting. You can just pronounce it however you want.
Yep.
And it'll be fine. And you don't have to go into the extreme Kyra versus Kira wars.
No, not the Kyra versus Kira wars.
Yep. I don't remember what Jason said on Oblivion Oath. I've always heard Caliphas. Or at least that's how I've said it. But you never know. Anyway, we've certainly squirreled again in pronunciations.
Fair enough.
We talked about sort of converting the skills, the monsters, treasure, and your adventures. Now if you
find a subsystem?
If you find a subsystem, sometimes you don't have to convert it all. For instance, as I mentioned before a few times about War for the Crown, I was running the Influence subsystem in War for the Crown with, the Pathfinder First Edition Influence Systems author in the game. And I just didn't convert it. Like, sure, the DCs, I converted all the DCs in the adventure, and that included the Influence DCs. And it worked just fine. And Rocket Lettuce says victory points. And that's absolutely right. In fact, as we mentioned before, in the Game Mastery Guide, we not only want to give you some of these subsystems in 2nd edition, but we want to give you a framework of what victory points kind of are so that you can build your own subsystem. And not only do we want to do that, but we kind of have done that. So hopefully it will work out. But when you're building subsystems, absolutely, you can use the concept of victory points to just sort of convert almost anything. And you'll often find, if you look at like the launch Pathfinder Society scenarios, a lot of them use this as well, because when they didn't, I suggested that they changed to it. That sort of the victory point-ish standard, which I used in my conversion of the influence system, is let's try to gain victory points. Let's assume you're gaining them. A critical success gains 2 points. A success gains 1 point. A failure does not gain point, and a critical failure loses a point. So if you use that as the baseline, it generally works pretty well, and it tells some interesting stories, like how our alchemist kept rolling natural ones to influence this one wizard, and he eventually thought the alchemist was an assassin, and pulled aside one of the other PCs to warn him that, hey, your alchemist that you brought might be an assassin.
And then we thought that maybe that PC was actually an assassin or had something weird going on with that secret society that he was part of that he wouldn't tell any of the fellow PCs about, other than the vague whispers that the fellow PCs got.
It'll be fine, guys. It'll be fine. What do you guys have against secret societies that just want to create rules exploits to gain immortality or other infinite loops? That's why he was playtesting the system.
Yep.
I'm sure there'll be no problems.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so here's another question from Edna. As a fan of planar adventures in Pathfinder 1e, what should I know about converting rules for planar traits in 2nd edition? Well, they will be in the Game Mastery Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can check them out there. Generally, we're trying to make it so that they're easier for you to run in those other planes. So anything that really brought play to a halt is probably, we're going to try to find a way to not do that. But we haven't really revealed anything about what we actually did on them yet. And this is not a stream for totally new reveals, but I'll just say, check out the Game Mastery Guide. We've got you covered. Alright, let's see. Fijam says that the 2-1, 0, -1 works really well with the PFS2 scenarios. Yeah, it's actually just a great framework because of the fact that someone who's really good at it can help cover from someone who doesn't know what they're doing in your group.
But it also lends itself easily to scaling, because the more PCs you have, the more points that you can need in order to... And it's a very easy toggle from that regard, because if you scale based on the DC rather than the number of points, then you can run into issues where that is then more and more selective if you don't have exactly that right PC in the group who's like a really well trained in that skill, they're a master of the skill or whatever, then you'll have a lot more trouble getting that to work.
Alright, so Exton Lynn has a question that Arcane has partially answered about hazards. It's like, what's the deal with hazards? Oh, Numbat made it! Yay, Numbat!
Yay, thanks for subbing again!
Yep. But what's the deal with hazards? They always seem to have, like, one number in there that's super high, and possibly their attack bonus, which is also always high. Well, there's a reason for that, Exton Land and Arcane. And Arcane sort of guessed it. They were always larger in PF1 and seemed that way in PF2. So, simple hazards have a very high attack bonus. Because, especially simple hazards, sometimes complex, because of the fact that their only thing that they do in existence is if they actually happen to go off, they make an attack roll, and if that misses, then nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a monster has to be able to sustain the fact that it's constantly there beating on you every second of every turn. And so you're going to die if we give it a bonus that is the same as the bonus appropriate for something where it's going, gone.
Mm-hmm.
But that is... Oh, it's Alex. He's here too.
Hi!
Oh yeah, Arcane has it. They only get one shot. I just was cautious of overcritting. Yeah, so...
Keep in mind with the damage there, to calibrate it so that if it crits, it's not just like, oh, this almost certainly crits and then they die.
So that is really something you only have to worry about at level 1 and maybe 2. But it is something that I had to, like, normally, when I'm looking through these Pathfinder Society adventures, they're actually really solid, but one of the few things that I've had to suggest in changes was actually some first level, just legitimately, it was a hazard that was reasonable for first level people to face.
Mm-hmm.
It was maybe 2nd or 3rd level.
I followed the design guide.
It was followed completely, or you were the author, I think, followed it completely. But it just turned out that it had an okay chance, pretty good chance of critting a first level character, and if it was like a sorcerer or something, they would die. Because of the instant death for double your hit points rule at level 1. So, I suggested, and you guys may have been hit by this trap, so if you hate the persistent damage, blame me. I suggested make it a horrifically high amount of persistent damage and then cut the initial damage by a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wouldn't worry about monsters generally being retconned out of the edition, because in general, I mean, we're looking at, this isn't a whole new setting. This is just, hey, we're stepping forward. We are bringing the timeline in place with the current year. We're saying what happened with the APs and stuff like that. So just because you didn't see something show up in the first bestiary, or maybe even if it doesn't show up in the second bestiary, that doesn't mean that it's not still around in the world and that you might not see it again in the future.
In fact, I'll take this a step further on the sock heels.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Daigle freaking loves sock heels.
Mm-hmm.
He designed them. He did an amazing job. I was the one to do the first sort of design pass on them when they came in, and I was just super impressed with them. He still loves them, and in fact, as a joke at one point when he had just come in and had been watching a show all along but gave really good pronunciation guides.
Mm-hmm.
He had been on our Discord for a while, and to get him to post, I was like, what? I could get him to post if I say this. It's pronounced Sakyle.
It worked.
And then he posted, he's like, no, it's Sakyle. While I'm never going to make a promise of anything on a stream because who knows what will happen, I will say that the managing developer would fight really hard with anyone who tried to claim that we should never put Sakils back in the game.
It would be even less likely than someone being able to erase Leshies if I was the only fan of Leshies.
And not only that, but like Sakils are definitely something that's very Pathfinder, very specifically Pathfinder. So they would already have a lot of supporters in the company just for that. So I am bullish on sock heels overall, even if you don't see them right away,
Mm-hmm.
just of them eventually coming. But to get back to the question about hazard, we talked about the attack bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another thing about a hazard, though, and you noticed it. Exton Len, you nailed exactly what was true about it, that most of them seem to follow the DCs, and then one of them is really high. Every hazard kind of has something that is like, oh, wow, this is the thing about this hazard. Because if they don't, a lot of those numbers have been designed to just be easily surpassed, right? So maybe the hazard's really hard to find. You were lucky to find it at all. Because if you have a dungeon with 20 traps that all are easy enough to find as the numbers we set, which are so easy to find that most PCs will get them a lot of the time, and a whole party that's searching can't possibly not find it. If you have 20 traps that are all the standard amount to find, your party's going to find all 20 of them.
And you're talking about sort of the baseline DC.
Yeah, I'm talking about the baseline DCs. Yeah. If you have 20 traps that are the baseline DC to find, your party will find all of the traps.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, like, somehow all of them roll natural ones. Or, all roll very badly.
Yeah.
It would probably take about 100 to 200 traps at that DCs to be able to comfortably say there would be a few of them that they don't find for sure. And that's not... You don't want to throw that many traps at them. Okay, but let's say you did want them to find it. Well, then there should be something that's interesting about dealing with it. Maybe it's really hard to disarm.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to think of another way to handle it. But maybe you want it to be really hard to find, so it's like, no, yeah, good you found that. That was going to do something really horrible to you, but it's super easy to disarm it now that you know about it, or just walk around.
Yeah.
So you need to figure out what is the hard thing about a hazard, because hazards are not reactive. They don't they literally have a reaction, but they don't follow the PCs, and they're not smart. They're not going to continue doing things unless they're a complex hazard. So the PCs can just simply bypass them in a way that you honestly want to happen some of the amount of the time, but probably not all of the time. Otherwise,
why are they even in the game?
Why did you design them? Like, you could even be a little cagey if you do want them to. For some reason, you want a group that likes disarming them and not encountering hazards. Just design, 3 hazards and then put 50 hazards in, but don't really explain what they are, and then the one time they don't find it, then you can use one of the 3 that you designed, I guess. Yeah. But if you're going to go to the trouble of designing it, it should probably have some chance of something happening. And that's exactly what is going on there. Rico the Bolt one-shot a level 1 rogue with a spear launcher crit and called it good. He had hero points. Oh yeah, we're not worried about one-shotting them from full to 0 hit points with the symbols. That's fine. They have hero points. But at first level, you might be able to take them to double their max HP with the damage. And there was a hazard in one of the starting PFS scenarios that I think its average damage could do it to a sorcerer before I looked at it, and above average damage might be able to take out someone that wasn't a sorcerer that like a bad con 8 hit point class.
Yeah,
or
so
something
we
like that.
changed it.
So it's changed. It's not in there like that. There's pretty much no way that you're going to be one-shotted by it now. And it's all good. But a spear launcher is exactly an example of one that it's probably not going to kill you by doing double damage. Alright, so let's see. No Heartless Shark is wondering about the DC to remove persistent damage. So, the point about persistent damage DC is it might seem like it's high, but to be perfectly honest, a DC 15, especially one that you can make a second attempt each round if somebody is helping you. So 2 DC 15s each round. The chance that, and one of which happens before you took the damage, right? So there's one before you take the first damage. There's 2 before you take the second damage. That means there's 5 before you take the damage the third time, right?
Yeah.
And the probability of failing it all 5 of the times so that you take the damage even 3 times is actually only 16. It's about 1 in 6, right? Assuming someone's helping you. So it actually is not as hard as it seems. It doesn't last particularly long. And I decided to answer this question in part because converting persistent damage type things, and we talked about using persistent damage and converting hazards.
Yeah. So
we're
it's
not
kind of
we're
more
not gonna
similar
always
to...
answer every question that's here, but if it's very relevant to conversion, like persistent damage.
So, I mean, it's... If you compare it to, like, persistent damage for 1d4 rounds or whatever, it's actually nicer than for 1d4 rounds.
Yes. It's actually significantly... it's generally significantly nicer than, say, take this again for 1d4 additional rounds.
Yeah.
Or just the amount of time that a high-level acid arrow could last, for example.
Yeah.
Alright, Max Astro thought the higher DC to 5 is because you were assuming 4 to 6 PCs testing that DC, only 1 DC to succeed. It could be true, although remember, only the searching PCs are testing it. We don't know how many people will be searching, so we don't necessarily... Because honestly, to get a DC that was actually high enough that if all the PCs were searching, it would be kind of hard to find it is kind of an unfairly high DC.
Yeah.
It just feels bad. It's just because at the point that 4 to 6 people are searching, it needs to be something that, like, the average party member needs, like, a 16 or 17 to get. Which, if you want there to be, like, an even odds of finding it, which is just not a good feel. So
and you
instead,
don't want people to feel like they have to always be searching all the time.
They can be rewarded if they're all searching all the time. That's okay. Maybe some of the hazards are going to be hard to disable, so it's going to be okay if they find all the ones that were hard to find. There's a conversion question about DCs that are in something like Survey Wildlife that's at the GM's discretion. And yes, those are definitely there. Generally, when you're surveying wildlife, if I was the GM, I would use the level of the wildlife that you're surveying to sort of determine how hard it was to survey, but that might be adjusted because, like, the Tarrasque's footprints are maybe much easier to identify than the Tarrasque level implies. So it really would depend on the situation, but you can always start with thinking about the level of the monster to help you determine a DC. Yes, Arcane points out that scythe traps can be a very big issue in killing first level characters. It really, by 3rd level, it's almost impossible to actually kill a character with a remotely reasonable trap. Unless it's supposed to kill them, like the Vorpal Executioner. That's supposed to kill you, and it does. Max Astro remembers when it was a DC 20 flat check for persistent damage until you got your first assistance on it that moved it to 15. But it did allow 3 checks per round, so it was actually even easier to get rid of it if you wasted a ton of actions, which was not a good design space because it was like, well, it's going to be a giant action sink and everybody might want to do that, so people don't get to do the thing they wanted to.
You're rolling your
Persistent
time.
damage doesn't actually get to stay and do its thing. So instead, it makes it more of a tougher decision because you don't get a million of them to remove it, but the persistent damage has more of a chance of actually hitting. Let's see. Wrath of the Fleshwort Queen had only 1 PC searching. Yup. That can happen. You can have no PC searching, although that's pretty rare. Alright. So, is it okay while converting to just add spells to a monster to make it a spellcaster? Yeah. You can do that. No problem.
some general guidelines in terms of adding spells?
I wouldn't add spells that a full caster of that level could not cast. And if you add a whole casting retinue of spells to something, you might want to think about, like, not also giving it the... Like, if it was an ogre, maybe don't let it keep the ogre's, like, high combat stats, too. Because that's sort of doubling down.
And not giving it more spells than, like, more of those high-level spells than a wizard of that level would have either. And this applies to First Edition as well, that, you know, you have those rare monsters that'll have that, oh, that's the very high-level effect that they have. But if you're picking something like that, making sure that that's something that's more going to be something that has a story impact rather than something that they're going to be using to attack PCs.
Lightspeed Flash is asking what got easier. It's the removing persistent damage is easier, but you can't spam it as much. That's what got easier. Sorry, Linda. What? I guess that's mostly it.
Yeah, no, I made my point.
About the spells. And you'll occasionally see creatures in the bestiary that, yeah, some of the first level outer sphere creatures have, like, a 4th level Reed Omens on there.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's not a 4th level fireball.
It's not. And they had friggin' commune before, so being downgraded to the level equivalent of divination is actually less than they had before. So, let's see. Lightspeed Flash wonders, could you put a multi-class archetype on a creature? You could. That's a good place to look for abilities to mine out to put onto a creature if you want to sort of give it that class. Absolutely. And if you're converting for, you can give it some abilities from that and then maybe bump its stats up a little bit and to add a level or two to its numbers and then call it good in most situations. In fact, some people want to run with their PCs having more feats, just twice as many feats, and in that case, you don't even need to adjust the monster's numbers, just maybe give the monster some things from multi-class archetypes, or other abilities that make sense for them, and that's it. Because the PCs have more abilities, the monsters should have more abilities too.
Yeah.
Maybe give all spellcasters steady spellcasting, recognize spell, and counter spell, or something like that. Just as a suite of general use spellcasting abilities that before, like, it was an investment for the PCs to have, maybe, but now it's like, well, we doubled all of the PCs' feats. Of course, if the spellcasters ignore them at this point, then they've chosen to ignore them. Alright. So, we've talked a lot about converting adventures, and honestly, they're the easiest thing to convert, but some people who are tuning in might be really excited about converting their favorite character to Pathfinder Second Edition. And, certainly I converted my character Iakovas, who, I actually rebuilt him along with you guys on the blog, that you saw on Paizo.com. And I converted another one of my characters, Lacer, that you guys can see on Friday, and, Roll for Combat. At least in part because, Roll for Combat, Steven gets us, like, this amazing art of the character, and I thought, if we're gonna have a really cool piece of art, I should get art for a character that I really like. And Steven said that I need to be ready to have that character die ignominiously, so we'll see. We'll see if that happens. At least I'll still have her picture.
Yes, we'll still have her First Edition version.
That's true. That's true. And honestly, just like everything we've said so far up to this episode on the GM side applies equally for the character. Think about what made that character's concept on a conceptual level. You'll often do well. Obviously, if you have something that was mechanical that was absolutely niche for your concept, it's possible for that to happen, but honestly, you probably don't.
So what is it about playing that character that you really like?
Right.
So, for example, let's say that I wanted to play my Oracle, Nyla Abusir, and I didn't have an Oracle yet.
Sure.
So when I think about Nyla, I think that what I like about Nyla is that she has combat prowess, but she also has a lot of spells to help with removing bad conditions that happen to people.
Okay.
So if I were to play her, I could get that, and she also has sort of thematically the idea that she has ties to ancestors and things like that. So, but if I were to play her mechanically, I could still look at playing her as a cleric with the war priest idea, because then she would still have those divine spells, but yet she would have that martial prowess that I went to by going through the what was her mystery. It was like the
Battle.
battle. Yeah. So I can still, because that would still be
Illyria
pretty
is
similar
an
to
even
battle.
better
Yeah.
example for this, because there was a time in the playtest where you wanted to convert your barbarian / rogue / alchemist character, and we literally did not have any of those except rogue, and you didn't choose rogue.
Yeah.
Because we only had the core 4 classes in the early alpha, super early alpha. So you started by making her I think a cleric of Gorum.
Yeah, I started by making her a cleric of Gorum, and then that still worked conceptually.
And you tried that and a fighter a little bit.
Yeah, because she could still, because then the idea is that she was a cleric, but she was focused more on rushing into battle, and then she would just cast these spells occasionally. Then she became a barbarian with the...
Then she became a barbarian.
Yes.
Because that came out.
Yes.
And it had the spirit totem, which was her totem.
Yes.
But then you decided to go with different totems to try all the totems, and you really liked the dragon totem just because it was awesome.
So I decided to go with the dragon totem.
But then we got multi-class archetypes.
Yes.
So you went with barbarian, multi-classed into cleric, because we still didn't, in fact, have the alchemist.
Yes.
At that point.
But that would still give me some other thing I could do
because
to
the
buff
alchemist
myself.
multi-class wasn't even in the playtest.
Yeah. So I went with that, and that still let me play a character that felt similar. The idea of the angry and impetuous character who rushes into things without thinking and has a little bit of extra support in terms of spells and things like that she can use for herself and others. But mostly she's about smashing things.
Yep. And, like, to some people who the mechanics are inextricably tied, I get that. Like, when I create a character, I have a very big roleplay idea in my head, but sometimes what really led me to create that character in the first place was some kind of mechanical aspect. But I still think I could have fun playing with the roleplay that I created to reach that aspect. Like, for instance, my character Grace, pretty much the fact that she's a Fey Foundling, unlike my character Lacer, who was a Fey Foundling before that even did anything useful back in the Pathfinder campaign, 3.5 campaign setting, where it was like, you can make friends with animals, but you don't add your level to it, so good luck. And that just got her to be attacked by rats every time she tried to talk to them.
Oh my god, I remember that.
Yep, but my character Grace, she was raised by Fae, and I think in PF2 I'd be okay with just saying that she was.
Yeah.
But it was totally so that her lay on hands would heal for more. And she also had a very complicated backstory and personality that, some of them were just things I thought, okay, this character is pretty strong, I'll just give her some weaknesses, like how she has the Wrecker Oracle curse, which is a very bad choice for a paladin that multi-classes into Oracle. But some of them were entirely so that she added charisma to everything and some things multiple times.
Yes.
But I could still tell the story of Grace as a champion of Arche, who was raised by the Fae and came from a bloodline of sort of Mendevian nobles until she was captured by the Fae. And don't add my charisma to initiative, saves 3 times, saves once, AC 3 times. But I think that the character she became is more than that.
Yeah.
So when you convert a character like that, you're going to be able to be fine, even with the core rulebook in many cases.
And the more options come out,
obviously, if your character is a gunslinger and they just can't be a crossbow or bow person, they have to have a gun, then you don't have a gun.
Though I imagine too that if you're doing this in a home game, you can create guns that work similar mechanically to the bows and things like that are out right now, and then
you could even
make little tweaks from there.
If you're too worried about, and most people in the stream aren't. In fact, there's already in the Arcane Mark Discord, Reese, who is on here as Cobalt Crusader, has done a bunch of gun stuff. But if you're a little squeamish about actually making new rules, you could just literally say, oh yeah, in my game for now, guns are simple weapons that in fact literally are crossbows that just says gun.
I'm just saying that's the easiest way to do it, because then you don't have to do other stuff.
I mean, heck, in the drawing board room first days, when people were like, what about Starfinder? We could do that. We could just reskin everything. Like that was put out there until after like pretty much everyone were like, no, you cannot do that. It needs to be its own game.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a kit bash, you could probably do it. And yes, unfortunately, Pumpkin has seen 4 different homebrew guns. I'm sure you will see more than 4 homebrew guns, and that you will see more than 4 third-party guns, probably.
Yeah, and I'm sure third parties are going to be putting out a lot of stuff, so that's a great resource to look at as well for your home games.
Alright, and yeah, Alex made a special kind of ancestral gun for the Nashi ancestry because the art he happened to have a gun, and he didn't want people to bug him about it. That is perhaps a microcosm of... Alex has just answered every question that has ever been asked of, like, why is this character or monster using this weapon? Doesn't make any sense. They're a high-level fighter, and it's just like a club. That is the answer, everyone.
Yes.
You don't need to ever ask it again. It's
because
when you said that they wielding a very complicated greatsword, and the art came in with the club, and that's what you have.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also Alex's approach there too, where he creates a sort of a special ancestral gun there, is one of those things that is really awesome for future proofing too, because then that can still exist in the same ecosystem. Let's say down the line Pathfinder puts out as officially, here's what guns are. So if he had said, oh, this is what a pistol is, then it could be seen that, you know, oh, but that's a different version of pistol from Paizo's version. Whereas by doing it in sort of like, oh, this is a special Nashi gun, then this can easily coexist without confusion with any other guns that come out.
And Edna points out the bestiary monsters do not actually use the weapons depicted in their artwork. They almost always do. And sometimes in Pathfinder First, to the detriment of the monster, because the weapon that was in its artwork just didn't do what we wanted it to do. They generally do. We've definitely changed weapons in even the Pathfinder 2 bestiary, where at least we can compensate for changing a weapon pretty easily with top-down monster design, because the piece of art that came in was just using something else, or just a very different armor. It is super common. In fact, if you are asking... There's certain weapons that if you ask for it, you just expect that... Like, if you order a Morning Star, you better be ready to get a flail. Like, if you're not ready to have a flail that you couldn't use a flail for that situation, don't order a Morning Star. Probably order a mace. And even then, maybe you should be ready to get a flail. Just there are ways that you... Weapons and armor are hard because there's so many of them, and the terms we use in Pathfinder are not always the same, even that the real world uses. Like, if you think about long swords and bastard swords, like arming swords in the way that the real world
What about real world studded leather armor, Mark?
Oh man, Roll for Combat is back after playing Book 5 of Dead Sons with Stephen Rodney McFarlane. That's Stephen's book of Dead Sons, right? That's pretty cool. Alex points out everyone wants to wield a weapon called a pipsqueak.
That's a pretty awesome name for a weapon.
That's probably true. I think people want to use that. That reminds me of the noisy cricket from Men in Black. The little tiny gun that just had a giant explosion. Alright, so yeah, when you're converting a character, you want to look at it sort of more conceptually. And Rico is asking about touch AC, and Arcane says you don't need to use that. You should... Oh, Alex was going for the noisy cricket with the pipsqueak. Great. Alright, yeah. There you go. In fact, there was no reason to use touch AC, and one thing that I found that was interesting was my little brother showed me a clip from some kind of one of those shows where they're like, who's the strongest? And it was like Knights versus Pirates, where they just took early firearm from pirates and just shot it at full plate from, in some cases, very point blank, and the full plate was just fine. The early gun did not penetrate the full plate at all. Oh, Rico was making a joke, but fell victim to pose. Oh, Deadliest Warrior, Unfortunate Pumpkin is correct. There we go. I see. Roll for Combat always plays with the author, just like Sandstone's Secret by Linda Zayas Palmer. and sometimes with meddling second people.
Well, Rico, you can't say that we don't take you seriously.
There we go.
On this stream.
That's right. On the internet, Poe's law will always triumph. Zathos of Verisia says you could just leave guns out of PF2 altogether. We can't really do that. They're a part of Golarion. I know that there are a lot of people who don't like guns. Honestly, I sort of have a different problem with the fact that, like, there's this enclave of guns and they never spread and they never advance. That is sort of just them and tech, as from the standpoint of someone who's in AI, just like, it just doesn't make any sense, and that I think you should either not have them or just not do that. But that's sort of a fantasy trope of, oh, there's this place with guns and they don't advance, even though, like, in Japan, they found a few guns that washed up on the shore, and then they all had them by a later era. So, Exton Land, you'd think it's only been 8 years that they've had the guns in Alkenstar. Well, I guess by Golarion standpoints, if we turn it into Golarion years.
What is it like? Every Golarion year is like,
because obviously Golarion's backstory of, like, 50,000 years of human history is way more than our world has.
Things progress more slowly.
The Grand Duchy of Alkenstar has actually had guns in roughly the form that we know them from.
Wait, go to the history section.
Yeah, it's in the history section. It's a long. It's.
The Gunwars were founded in 4620.
They were founded in 4620, but that was a while after the dwarves had it. That was when Alkenstar sort of, like, the human appropriated the gunworks. So first of all, they made a gunworks, which it specifically says only makes, like, 1 gun a month because they're spending all the rest of the time on R&D.
Yes.
And that's in 4620. So the current year is 4719.
Yes, so they've been researching and developing guns for at least a century.
Almost 100 years since the gunworks were founded, and the dwarves had it for a while before that. But anyway, we don't need to squirrel off into in Golarion years. That's probably like 2 years that they had the gun.
No, totally. Well, I mean, if you want people to dive unnecessarily deep into canon and get off into all these sorts of little rabbit holes, that we can do that too.
Now, to be also fair, I love bows and swords, and I don't want there to be a world where it's just like, oh yeah, everything's replaced with guns. I feel like that would lose something, so I get it. And to me, an acceptable answer is to have no guns. But I also understand why people like guns, and I feel bad for them on that perspective as well. So I just deal with the fact that it doesn't really make any sense. Because I think that's, for me, that's a lot better than just everyone having guns and not using the other weapons.
Yep.
In any case, that is a completely different topic than converting. Although, we did get there from converting guns being one of the big things that people were converting.
So we've been getting into some more squirrels, which usually means that we're getting toward the end of our actual topic. Do we have more conversion-related questions?
I would pose a different heuristic, because we get into a ton of squirrels through the entire episode.
Yes.
But when we get to the point where Linda says we've been getting into more squirrels, so that usually means we're approaching the end of our topic. That usually means we're approaching the end of our topic. And it happens a lot.
That's true.
This is like so that actually, usually Linda has a really good sense of when we're getting to the end of our topic. So whenever a squirrel that's near the end of our topic happens, she'll say that.
Well, it's because,
even though sometimes we do like 5 or 6 squirrels in a row and we have a lot more topic.
I know, but the point is though that it feels like we're on a squirrel and we're not really heading back, and we've been on that squirrel for a while, and I don't really know how I would segue back to what we were actually talking about.
Yep. Well, I think the gun discussion is interesting, and the point that without touch AC, like, some of the people who didn't like guns in PF1, it was because the mechanics of them were kind of had problematics in 2 directions of lots of negative things on it, and then a super overpowered thing on it, and hoping that would balance it out, which it didn't always in game. And Zathos makes a point that when it doesn't have that, it might not be as bad for the people who were on the mechanics side, because there was the mechanics and the flavor side.
Yes.
The guns episode could be interesting, although I don't think it could carry a whole episode to just have us all talking about that. But it's definitely a good squirrel. And we got some interesting historical points that people have made here. But we were talking about converting characters. We're talking about classes, and maybe you don't have the gunslinger. We talked about what have we not talked about in converting. I think the only things we haven't mentioned are like specific spells. You probably don't need to convert a specific spell because there's probably something similar you can use.
Mm-hmm. There's also the second edition conversion guide, which is up, and that has some guidance for some more specific stuff that Jason wrote up.
Yep, and Logan and I helped someone on the classes, but really that was Jason's baby, and he should get the credit for all the really excellent conversion notes that were in the conversion guide. We basically just said, here are some other ideas for some of these classes, and here are ones that don't always necessarily... We're not sure if they're really going to work. But that should help you get your favorite character converted. I think we've given a lot of good tips to get your favorite adventure converted. I'm very bullish on being able to convert adventures, especially if you have the Game Mastery Guide material at your fingertips. It's fast, it's easy, you can learn how to do it as you go along, so that it doesn't even take very much time for anyone.
So you've used that expression a couple times today, that you're very bullish about something. Yes. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
That means that it is...
From context, it seems to mean, like, enthusiastic about, sort of like markets, but...
Yeah, it's like bull markets, so that means that I am predicting good things.
Okay.
If you say you're bullish, that means you're predicting good things. You think that things are going to go well, because bulls are people who think that the stock market is doing... It came from bulls in the stock market, and people think that the stock market's always going to be great, and they act in that way, which is not always good for them if it's not going to do great.
Yeah, it's not a usual expression. You've just been using it today.
No, it's a usual expression.
No, I mean not for you. I'm not. Okay. You don't need to Google it to me to prove it. I don't.
Usual expression.
I don't need you to Google it.
It's in the dictionary. It's not just Urban Dictionary.
Yes, of the stock market, but it doesn't
optimistic, hopeful, buoyant, positive.
But it says relevant to the stock market.
Yeah, but it also has synonyms of optimistic, positive, disposed to look on the bright side. In the Oxford, it also is confident or optimistic about something.
Okay, there we go.
Those who are bullish on the nation's economic prospects is the example.
Okay, my point is that you don't usually use that expression.
Squirrel time. All right. Numbat says converting multi-class characters is a little different. Like aspects of the current multi-class system makes it a little more difficult to mirror a previous character. I found that it's actually usually pretty easy to convert a multi-class character that wasn't, except for maybe ones that had like a huge number of classes right away. Like obviously the Wonder Twins, the characters we've mentioned before on the show that had like 1 level in Cavalier, 1 level in Paladin, 1 level in Bard, 1 level in Karmic Sorcerer. That I think that was their first level. Those guys are pretty hard to convert.
Rico said, if you're all bearish, you think things will be bad, but also kind of a hoot.
Yep. So, Arcane Spiritualist Paladin Swashbuckle Oracle is going to be hard to convert. But, in actual honesty, it seems like sometimes when you think, oh wow, having to have one of the classes be the main class, and I can only ever get up to 10th level abilities from the other class, from that class that is not my top class. The thing about Pathfinder First Edition is, so you can mathematically prove, or just think about it. So you have at least, let's say you have 2 classes, that's the minimum, right? One of the classes is more or equal to the other class. Well, it has to be. So they're equal at 10, or one of them has more, right? If the one of them has more at level 20, it has to have 11 or more, and the other class has to have 9 or less. Which means it's always impossible to create a character, even in Pathfinder First Edition, that can get options that are higher than 10th level from its class that is not its highest class.
Mm-hmm.
So it still doesn't actually prevent you from doing anything that you couldn't do in that regard. It mostly... Numbat is saying it's partially that you don't always receive everything from the second class when you buy into it. That's true. In fact, that's part of what lets us put some really nice things at the first level of classes now. It just depends, like, you get different things from each class anyway, so it depends on your expectations, right? What did you expect to get right away when you multi-classed, and what did you expect to get from that class overall?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, rogues didn't have a racket ability at all in first edition. So the fact that you don't get racket ability, well, that didn't change. But maybe the fact that you don't start with sneak attack right away is something that's a little different. But you do get a lot of skills. So I think it works out, especially if you're willing to spend the feats to pick up some of the other features. Stranu is gifting a tier 1 sub. Thanks, Stranu. We will add you the extra points. Woo. Alright. Everyone's very generous, and we really, really do appreciate it. Mm-hmm. It helps us. If we're gonna buy some foam or something to put behind the mic or other things like that, it's definitely nice to be like, oh well, we had some subscriptions too. So plus it's just nice to the community. Everyone gets the leshies.
It's so friendly.
Now Alex has to return. He was gifted.
You have to watch the show.
There you go. Yeah, Night Fox, that's true. In PF2, you always have your base class. If you really, really, really want to switch out of it into another class entirely, you can always ask your GM about retraining. It's not one of the normal retrainings, but you can. Yeah, Alex, some of the abilities that are really, really iconic, also Flurry of Blows for Monk, and in addition to Inspired Courage, which Alex mentioned for Bards, are a little bit higher up in level. That's generally because of the fact that they're actually a pretty outlandish ability. And so, therefore, you need to pay a pretty expensive feat to get it. Those are feats that, if you put them in another class overall, at 8th level, if you put Flurry of Blows and Fighter at 8th level, fighters would take that at 8th level if they were using weapons that it applied to. And so, sometimes they came at higher levels for that reason. It's just are we going to give it to you at all? We probably should, but if so, it needs to be a pretty high level feat. Or the Inspired Courage cantrip is fundamentally a very strong buff for its action cost compared to some of the other buffs that the characters can put up at certain levels. And so, that's sort of where it comes into deciding exactly when you can take a particular option. And that's about the time I think where you can take Inspired Defense, too. So you get more options for some of those really big compositions. And honestly, I could see a Bard class archetype that gives you Inspired Defense at first level and gives you Inspired Courage later on. So, there's a lot to think about when deciding multi-class archetypes and when converting your characters. But don't be afraid to talk to your GM about making adjustments. I mean, if you look at Jason's conversion guide, it sometimes says, hey, maybe you can change the prime ability score of this spellcaster to sort of feel more like your character did from Pathfinder First. Numbat points out Bard Rogue is a combo from their first Pathfinder character. Bard Rogue is actually a really good multi-class. It really feels good about the number of skills that you get. It's not exactly the same as a Bard Rogue would be before, but getting all the spell casting plus all those skills and some of the other Bard abilities can be very satisfying. Alright, so I think that Linda was right that we've been winding down here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say goodbye to YouTube and then talk a little bit to Twitch for a little bit more after that.
Sounds good.
Bye YouTube, see you next time.
Bye.